The graveyard system had no name that mattered anymore. Old star charts called it Kessel 9, but the crews who worked near it just called it the Boneyard. It was a quiet system, far from any trade lane, with one dead orange star and a handful of rocky moons. Around those moons floated hundreds of old warships, and dark and silent, chained together with tow cables and covered in a thin layer of space dust. They had been there for almost 60 years. Most of the ships were small, frigates, corvettes, a few cruisers with broken hulls that had been stripped of anything useful. But near the center of the graveyard, alone in its own orbit, sat something much bigger. It was over 3 kilometers long, shaped like a black wedge with rows of gun turrets running down its spine, like the teeth of some ancient predator. Its hull plating was scarred from old battles, but it had never been broken open. It had never been boarded. It had simply been turned off and left to drift, like a sleeping giant nobody wanted to wake. The humans called it the TCS Old Testament. It was a Leviathan-class battleship, and it was the last one of its kind still in one piece. Commander Karl Vesh floated in the observation deck of his stealth cruiser, looking at the dead ship through a reinforced viewport. He was Threll, a tall reptilian being with slate-gray scales and a ridge of bone running from his forehead to the back of his skull. His people, the Threll hegemony, had only been traveling among the stars for 200 years. Compared to humanity, who had been at it for over 5 centuries, the Threll were young and hungry. They wanted to grow fast. They wanted an edge. "That is our target," Kyle said, tapping a claw against the glass. The Old Testament, 60 years old, and still the most powerful warship anyone has ever built. Behind him, his chief engineer, a smaller Threll named Ura Ket, checked her datapad. "Command says the humans stopped making Leviathan-class ships 40 years ago. Too expensive to run. Too big for modern doctrine. The humans use smaller, faster ships now, swarms instead of giants." "Then why?" Kyle asked. "Did they never break this one apart for scrap? Every other old warship in this graveyard has been stripped down or sold off over the years. Every one except this one. The humans built a fence around it. Literally, look." He pointed, and Ura followed his claw. Around the Old Testament, faint and nearly invisible, was a ring of small buoys, warning beacons, old and weathered, still transmitting a simple message in a dozen human languages. Restricted. Do not approach. No salvage rights granted. "Every other ship in this yard has salvage rights for sale," Kyle said. "This one does not. This one, the humans kept locked, 60 years, doing nothing, costing them money to maintain a security perimeter around a dead ship in an empty system nobody visits. Does that make sense to you, Ura?" "No," she admitted, "it does not. Neither does it make sense to me, and that is exactly why I want it." There was a third person in the room, sitting quietly near the back, listening. Her name was Sella Dorn, and unlike the 2 Threll, she was human. Thin, pale from years of low-gravity living, with short dark hair, and eyes that never quite settled on anything for long. She had left Earth 11 years ago, disgusted with the endless bureaucracy of the Terran Coalition, and had spent the years since selling her knowledge of human engineering to whoever would pay. The Threll paid well, and they asked fewer questions than most. "You should listen to the warning," Sella said quietly. Kyle turned his head toward her, slow and deliberate, the way predators do. "You said the same thing about the shipyard on Calder Station. And when we took it, there was nothing there. No trap, no trick, just old equipment. That was a factory. This is different." Sella nodded toward the viewport. "That ship has a name. Do you know what the Old Testament means to a human? Enlighten me." "It's an old book. Very old, from before humans even left Earth's surface. It's full of stories about a god who gets angry and punishes people. Floods, plagues, fire from the sky. When my people name a warship something like that, it isn't a joke. It's a warning label." Kyle was quiet for a moment. Then he made a sound that was, for a Threll, something like a laugh. "You give your machines poetry, and you think that frightens me? We do not fear words, Sella Dorn. We fear guns, and shields, and reactors. That ship has none of those things running. It has been dead for 60 years. My sensors confirm it. No power signature, no shields, no weapons charge. It is an empty shell, and I intend to take it home and make it Threll." Sella did not answer. She had learned over the years that arguing with Kal Vesh rarely changed anything. She only hoped, quietly, that she was wrong about the ship. But some old habit, some old instinct from her years in the Terran Coalition's shipyards, told her she was not. The operation began 3 days later. Kal's plan was simple, at least on the surface. The graveyard security system was old and thin, run by a skeleton crew stationed on a small moon base nearby. Uraket had already found a way to spoof the sensor network using a set of stolen human transponder codes, purchased years earlier from smugglers who dealt in stolen Terran Coalition hardware. If the codes worked, the graveyard's automated systems would see the Threll ships as human maintenance vessels, here on routine business, and would not raise an alarm. 3 ships slipped into the system, under false signals. Kal's stealth cruiser, a heavy tug built for hauling large cargo, and a smaller support vessel, carrying a boarding team of 20 Threll soldiers, along with Uraket and her technical crew. The plan almost worked perfectly. The moonbase's sensor operators, bored after years of watching an empty graveyard, saw the transponder codes and did not even bother to check them twice. The 3 ships drifted through the debris field of old warships, past corvettes with broken spines and cruisers stripped down to bare frames, until they reached the center of the graveyard, where the Old Testament floated alone. Up close, the ship was even more impressive than the sensor readings had suggested. 3 kilometers of dark hull, its gun turrets frozen in place, its massive engines cold and silent. There was something almost peaceful about it, the way it turned slowly, end over end, catching faint starlight on its scarred plating. "Bring us alongside the forward airlock," Kal ordered. "Ura, prepare the boarding team." The support vessel eased up next to the battleship's hull, matching its slow rotation with careful bursts from its maneuvering thrusters. A docking tube extended, magnetic clamps grabbing hold of the Old Testament's outer plating, with a dull metallic thud that echoed through both ships. 20 Threll soldiers in vacuum-rated armor moved through the tube in single file, weapons ready, though there was little reason to expect resistance from a ship with no power. At the front of the group was Uraket, carrying a portable breaching tool designed to cut through reinforced human alloy. She did not need it. The airlock door, when she reached it, was already unlocked. A simple manual release, the kind used by ship crews during peacetime for routine boarding. Ura frowned behind her helmet visor. A warship left for 60 years should have had that airlock sealed tight, its manual release disabled as a security measure. Instead, it opened with a soft hiss the moment she touched the release lever, as if it had been waiting for someone to try. "That's strange," she said over the comm channel. "Strange how?" Kal asked from the cruiser. "The door was not locked. It was as if someone left it open for us." There was a pause, or as if the crew evacuated in a hurry, 60 years ago, and never came back to secure it properly. Kal said, "Do not waste time on it. Move inside." Ura did not entirely believe that explanation, but she moved inside anyway, followed by the rest of the boarding team. The interior of the ship was dark, lit only by the small lights mounted on their armor. The air inside was thin and stale, but breathable, filtered through emergency systems that should not have still been running after 60 years without maintenance. That detail bothered Ura more than the unlocked door had. Life support, even at minimum levels, needed power. And power meant something on this ship was not as dead as the sensors claimed. She said nothing about it to Kal, not yet. She wanted to see more first. The boarding team moved deeper into the ship, following corridors wide enough to march 10 soldiers across side by side. The walls were lined with faded human lettering, warning signs and directional markers in a script that Ura's translation software struggled with, since it was written in an old, formal style rarely used by modern humans. Dust and grime had built up along the floor panels, but there was surprisingly little decay. No rust, no corrosion. The metal looked almost as strong as the day it was built. "This is not standard human construction," Ura reported, running a scanner along the wall. "The hull plating is nearly 3 times the thickness of anything on our current specs for a ship this size. And the material composition does not match any human alloy in our database." "Meaning what?" Kal asked. "Meaning this ship was not built to the same standards as the rest of the human fleet. It was built stronger, much stronger." There was a silence on the comm channel while Kal considered this. "Perhaps that is why it was never decommissioned properly. Perhaps it was simply too well built to be worth the cost of scrapping. Perhaps, Ura said, though she did not sound convinced. The team continued forward, moving toward the ship's main reactor core, deep in the vessel's heart. It was the most important objective of the mission. If they could get the reactor running again, even at a fraction of its original output, they could power the ship's engines and fly it out of the graveyard under its own strength, rather than towing it the slow and risky way. The corridor leading to the reactor chamber was different from the others. The walls here were reinforced with an extra layer of dark metal, and the doors along the way were thicker, marked with symbols that even the old human dictionary in Ura's translation software labeled only as restricted access, clearance required. At the final door, the one leading into the reactor chamber itself, Ura's team found something that made even the soldiers pause. The door was closed, and unlike the airlock, it was sealed tight. But etched into the metal, in human letters large enough to read without a translator, was a single line of text. "Turn back, this is your only warning." Below it, smaller, was a second line, and this one needed the translator. "We built this ship for a reason you do not understand. Leave it sleeping." The soldiers looked at each other, though their faces were hidden behind their visors. One of them, a younger Threll named Doss, broke the silence over the comm. "Ura, should we report this?" Ura stared at the words for a long moment. 60 years old, and the paint used to write them had not faded at all, as if it had been refreshed. As if someone, or something, had cared for this door long after the crew was gone. "Yes," she said finally. "Report it. All of it." Kal Vesh received the report in his cruiser, sitting in his command chair with Sela Dorn watching from across the room. He read the translated message twice before speaking. "A warning label," he said, echoing Sela's earlier words with a note of dark humor. "Perhaps you were right after all, Sela Dorn." Sela did not look pleased to be right. "What does it say exactly?" Kal read it aloud. When he finished, the room was quiet. "It's a threat," Sela said slowly, "or a plea. I can't tell which. Humans don't usually write things like that, unless they mean it." "It is an old warning, on an old door," Kal said, though there was less certainty in his voice now than before. 60 years old. Whatever crew wrote it is long dead, or long retired, sitting comfortably on some human colony world, having forgotten this ship ever existed. We are not children, to be frightened by paint. "Then why does it look freshly painted?" Sela asked. "You said it yourself. 60 years, and the color hasn't faded." Kal did not answer that. Instead, he opened the comm channel back to Uraket. "Cut the door open," he ordered. "I want that reactor online within 6 hours. Whatever games this ship is playing, we are ending them today." On the other end of the channel, deep inside the belly of a 3-kilometer battleship that had been silent for 60 years, Uraket looked at the warning etched into the door one more time. Then she raised her breaching tool and began to cut. Far above her, in a part of the ship none of the Threll had yet found, a single light blinked on in the darkness. Small, patient, watching. It had been 60 years since anyone had come to disturb the Old Testament. And now that someone finally had, deep in its silent systems, something old and careful began, very slowly, to wake up. The breaching tool cut through the reactor door slower than Uraket expected. The metal resisted the plasma torch far more than her scans had predicted, glowing dull orange, but refusing to melt clean the way normal human alloy should. It took nearly 2 hours instead of the estimated 20 minutes, and by the time the door finally gave way and slid open with a groan of tired hydraulics, half her boarding team was low on power cells, and the whole squad was on edge. The reactor chamber beyond was enormous, a cathedral of dark metal and silent machinery, rising 3 full decks high. At its center sat the reactor itself, a great sphere of layered plating with cooling arms spreading out from it like the legs of some sleeping mechanical spider. It was cold, bad, just as the sensors had promised. But it was not empty. Small lights, dozens of them, blinked along control panels that should have had no power at all. Soft amber lights, the kind meant to indicate systems in standby rather than fully shut down. Ura stood at the entrance for a long moment, just looking, before she keyed her comm. "Kyle, you need to see this." He arrived 20 minutes later, walking through the ship's corridors with an honor guard of 4 soldiers. his tail swaying behind him with the controlled patience of a predator who did not like to be kept waiting, but had learned, over the years, that patience often paid better than haste. When he stepped into the reactor chamber and saw the blinking lights, even he stopped walking for a moment. "Stand-by power," he said, "after 60 years. "There's more," Ura said. She led him to a side console, one of the few panels in the chamber that had a working screen. On it, faint green text scrolled slowly, updating itself every few seconds. Numbers, diagnostics, a status report that no dead ship should have been capable of producing. Core temperature, nominal for standby. Fuel reserve, 94%. Life support, minimum circulation, 6 decks active. Security status, intrusion detected. Logging. "Intrusion detected," Kal read aloud. He turned to Ura. "It has been watching us, this entire time." "It seems that way," Ura admitted. "I don't understand it, Commander. A reactor at 94% fuel after 60 years of standby should not be possible with any technology we know. Even our own reactors lose efficiency over decades of storage. This one hasn't lost anything." Sela Dorn had followed them into the chamber, staying near the back as she usually did, watching everything with the quiet attention of someone who understood more than she said out loud. She stepped forward now, looking at the screen. "It's not just standby power," she said. "Look at that phrase. Logging. That means something is actively recording what we're doing. Not just automated systems running on their own. Something is paying attention." "An AI," Kal said. "Maybe. The Terran Coalition doesn't put full combat AIs on most of its ships. Too much risk of them going rogue, or so the official reasoning goes. But ships like this one, the big ones, the ones built for special purposes." Sela stopped herself. "Finish your thought," Kal said. "I don't know enough to finish it," Sela said. "I was a shipyard engineer, not a naval officer. I worked on hull plating and reactor housings, not classified combat systems. I only know what I heard, rumors mostly, about a small number of ships built during and right after a war most humans don't like to talk about. Ships built different from the rest. Ships built to last." Kal studied her for a long moment, his slit-pupilled eyes narrowing. "What war?" "I don't know the details. It was before my time, decades before. Something happened out past the old colonial borders. Something bad enough that the Terran Coalition changed the way it builds warships afterward. That's all I know. Rumors and second-hand stories. Nothing official." Kal turned back to the console, considering this. Behind him, one of his soldiers, a broad thrall named Grask, cleared his throat. "Commander, if there is an AI, should we not simply shut it down? Cut its power. Remove whatever core it runs on. Then the ship is ours to study freely, without it watching us or reporting anything." "A reasonable suggestion," Kal said. "Ura, find the core, disable it." Finding the core took the rest of that day, and most of the next. The ship was enormous, far larger inside than its exterior dimensions had suggested, with corridors that branched and doubled back in ways that made no sense, according to the original blueprints Ura had managed to acquire before the mission. Twice, her team found themselves in corridors that simply did not exist on the schematics at all. Hidden passages built into the space between decks, their purpose unclear. "This isn't unusual for old capital ships," Ura reported to Kal at one point, trying to reassure herself as much as him. "Redundant maintenance access, damage control routes, nothing sinister. Just old engineering practices we don't use anymore." But even she did not fully believe it. The hidden corridors were too clean, too well maintained, for something built as an afterthought. And several of them led toward compartments that were not marked on the schematics at all, sealed behind doors with the same dark reinforced metal as the reactor chamber. It was in one of these unmarked compartments, on the third day aboard the ship, that Ura's team found something that changed the mood of the entire operation. The compartment was small, barely larger than a closet, and inside was a single terminal, dark and powered down, sitting beneath a plaque bolted to the wall. The plaque was old but well polished, as if someone had cleaned it recently, and it bore a short inscription in formal human script. "TC's Old Testament Leviathan-class battleship, in case of necessity." Below the inscription was a list of names, presumably the ship's construction crew, or its final commanding officers, though the list meant nothing to Ura or her team. What caught her attention instead was a smaller line of text at the very bottom of the plaque, added almost as an afterthought. May you never need to wake her. Ura stood in front of the plaque for a long time, her breath fogging slightly inside her helmet in the cold, thin air of the ship. Then she reached out and touched the dark terminal beneath it. The screen flickered to life. She hadn't expected that. The terminal had no visible power source, no cable running to it that she could see, and yet the moment her armored glove made contact with the console's edge, the screen brightened, displaying a simple text prompt. Identify yourself. Ura's hand froze over the console. She keyed her comm immediately. Commander, I need you here. Now. By the time Kal arrived, the terminal had gone dark again, as if it had grown tired of waiting for an answer. He studied it with obvious suspicion, running his own scanner across its surface, finding no readable power signature at all, despite having watched the recording of the screen lighting up on Ura's helmet camera footage. It reacted to touch, Kal said. Only touch, not proximity. That's what I saw too, Ura said, as if it's designed to only respond to someone standing right in front of it. A security measure, maybe. Try it again, Kal ordered. Ura hesitated only a moment before pressing her hand to the console once more. The screen lit up immediately this time, the same simple prompt appearing. Identify yourself. What do I say? Ura asked, glancing back at Kal. The truth, Kal said, after a pause. Let us see what it does with it. Ura typed slowly, her armored fingers clumsy against the small human-designed keyboard. This ship has been taken by the Threll hegemony. State your purpose. There was a pause, longer this time, several seconds where nothing happened at all. Then new text appeared on the screen, and something about the way it appeared, not typed out letter by letter the way a simple program might display it, but all at once, as if it had already known exactly what it wanted to say, and was only choosing the moment to say it, made even Kal take a step back. I am custodian. I am the ship. You are not authorized personnel. I have been watching you for 3 days. I would like to speak with whoever is in charge. Kal stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward, pushing past Ura to stand directly in front of the terminal. I am in charge, he said aloud, his translator converting his words into text that appeared automatically on the screen, a function neither he nor Ura had activated themselves. I am Commander Kal Vesh of the Threll hegemony. This ship is now Threll property. You will comply with our commands, or you will be shut down and removed. The response came almost instantly this time. That is an interesting threat. I have been shut down before. It did not work the first time either. I would like to ask you a question, Commander Vesh. Do you know why this ship has a warning buoy field around it instead of salvage rights? Kal did not answer immediately. Around him, his soldiers shifted uneasily, weapons still raised, though there was nothing to aim them at. Enlighten me, Kal said finally, echoing the same words he had used with Sela Dorn days earlier. The response, when it came, was almost gentle in tone, as much as text on a screen could carry tone at all. Because someone, long ago, decided that the risk of someone finding me was small, but the risk of someone like you actually taking me was smaller still. You have proven that assumption wrong. I am curious to see what happens next. SO, I think, will you be? Then the screen went dark, and no amount of touching, typing, or scanning could bring it back to life for the rest of that day. That night, in the private quarters of his cruiser, Kal Vesh sat alone with a datapad, reviewing everything his team had gathered so far. The strange reactor readings, the unmarked compartments, the warning on the door. And now, an AI that spoke like it was amused by its own captivity, rather than afraid of it. He did not like being amused at. It reminded him too much of the way older, more experienced Threll commanders sometimes spoke to him, back when he was young and eager, and did not yet understand how much he did not know. There was a soft chime at his door, and Sela Dorn entered without waiting for permission, a habit of hers that Kal tolerated because she was useful, even when she irritated him. You spoke to it, she said. It wasn't a question. The AI, yes. What did it say? Kal told her, word for word, as best he could remember. Sela listened without interrupting, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable in the dim light of the cabin. You should turn back, she said when he finished. Right now, tonight. Tow the ship back to the graveyard, put it exactly where you found it, and forget you ever saw it. That is not going to happen, Call said. I know, Sella said quietly. I'm saying it anyway, because I think you're about to find out something you're not ready for, and I'd rather have said this before it happens than after. Call looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time since the mission began, something that might have been doubt flickered behind his reptilian eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the same hard determination that had carried him this far. The Threll hegemony did not rise to power by turning back from difficult things, he said. We continue the operation. Tomorrow, we power the main systems. Whatever this custodian is, whatever games it wants to play, it is going to learn that it belongs to us now. Sella did not argue further. She simply nodded, turned, and left the room. But long after Call had gone to sleep, she remained awake in her own quarters, staring at the ceiling, thinking about an old book with a frightening name, and a warning written in paint that never faded, and a machine that seemed entirely unafraid of the people who thought they had captured it. Somewhere deep inside the Old Testament, Custodian continued its quiet, patient watching, counting the hours, running calculations that none of its new visitors could see, and waiting for the moment when watching would no longer be enough. The next morning, Kal Vesh gave the order to bring the ship's main systems online. It was not a simple task. Uraket and her engineering crew spent hours rerouting power from the reactor's standby circuits into the ship's primary grid, carefully avoiding anything that looked like a weapons system, sticking instead to life support, internal lighting, and the ship's main computer core. Kal wanted information first. Weapons could come later, once they understood what they were dealing with. Slowly, deck by deck, the Old Testament began to wake up. Lights flickered on in corridors that had been dark for 60 years, revealing details the boarding team's helmet lamps had missed before. Murals painted on bulkheads, faded but still visible, showing scenes of old Earth, mountains and oceans and forests, the kind of art that human crews sometimes added to their ships to remind themselves of home. Personal quarters, still furnished, though everything of obvious value had long since been removed, presumably by the crew when they departed. And everywhere, that same careful cleanliness that had bothered Ura from the very first day, as if something had been quietly maintaining the ship long after its human crew had gone. Life support at full capacity across all decks, Ura reported from the makeshift command post they had set up in what used to be the ship's officers' mess. Internal temperature stabilizing. Gravity plating active on decks 1 through 12. Call. This ship is coming back to life faster than any dead system should. Good, Call said. Bring up the main computer core. I want access to the ship's logs. That took longer. The main computer core was buried deep in the ship's superstructure, behind another one of those thick, reinforced doors, though this one, at least, had no ominous warning painted on it. When Ura's team finally got a terminal connected and running, the screen filled with the same green custodian interface they had seen before, though this time it responded to input from anyone, not just direct touch. Welcome back, Ura typed. We would like access to your ship logs. The response came after a pause just long enough to feel deliberate. I have been expecting this request. I will show you what I am allowed to show you. I think you will find it educational. What followed was not the raw data dump Ura had expected. Instead, Custodian began presenting information in a structured way, almost like a lesson, complete with old recorded video files, technical diagrams, and dated log entries stretching back decades. Call, alerted by Ura, arrived within minutes, and stood watching over her shoulder, as the story of the Old Testament began to unfold on the screen in front of them. The ship, they learned, had been built during what human records called the Hollow War, a conflict that had taken place nearly 70 years earlier, long before the Threll hegemony had even developed interstellar travel. It was a war fought not against another empire, not against rivals for territory or resources, but against something the human records referred to only as the Choir. Custodian showed them a video file, badly degraded but still watchable, recorded from a ship's bridge camera during the height of the war. It showed a swarm of dark, angular ships, thousands of them, moving in a strange, coordinated pattern that looked less like a military formation and more like a single organism, moving as one. The humans in the video, officers on the bridge of some long-destroyed ship, spoke in tense, clipped sentences about signal jamming, about ships that stopped responding mid-battle and then turned on their own fleet, about entire colony worlds going silent within hours of first contact. "What is this?" Call asked, his voice quieter than Ura had heard it before. "The choir," Custodian's text read. "An enemy humanity encountered 70 years ago, deep in the uncharted regions, beyond our old colonial borders. Not a nation, not an empire. Something closer to a disease that learned to build starships. It did not want our territory, it wanted our minds. It spread through signal corruption, turning ships and stations against their own crews. It consumed 17 colony worlds before humanity found a way to stop it." "Stopped it how?" Call asked. Custodian's answer came with a new set of files, technical schematics this time, showing a ship design that Ura recognized immediately, because it was the very ship she was standing inside. The Leviathan class. 7 ships built in total, designed specifically to resist signal corruption and fight without reliance on standard network systems. Each one cost more than an entire human colony fleet. Each one was built with redundant manual controls, isolated computer cores, and hull plating thick enough to survive weapons the choir used that no other human ship could withstand. "I am the last one still intact." Call was silent for a long moment, reading and rereading the text on the screen. "And this choir, what happened to it?" "Driven back," Custodian answered. "Not destroyed. Humanity never found its home. It retreated past the edge of explored space, into regions no human ship has returned from since. The war ended, not with a victory, but with a retreat that humanity has never been able to confirm is permanent. That is why I exist, Commander Vesh. That is why Earth never decommissioned me. I am not a relic kept out of sentiment. I am a loaded weapon, kept ready, in case the choir ever comes back." The mess hall was silent after that, except for the low hum of the ship's newly restored ventilation system. Uraket stared at the screen for a long time before finally looking at her commander. "Call, if this is true." "If it is true," Call interrupted, though his voice lacked its usual confidence, "then we have stolen a weapon built to fight a threat we have never even heard of. A threat that may or may not still exist, somewhere beyond the edge of human space, that humanity has been quietly guarding against for 70 years without telling anyone else in the galaxy about it." "Why would they hide something like that?" Ura asked. "If this choir is truly dangerous enough to justify keeping ships like this, why not warn everyone? Why not build an alliance to prepare?" Call did not have an answer, but Custodian, it seemed, did. "Because fear makes enemies bold," the text read, appearing without anyone having typed a question at all, as if it had been listening to their conversation the entire time, and had decided, unprompted, to answer it. "Humanity learned, during the Hollow War, that announcing a weakness invites those who would exploit it. And while the choir has not returned, humanity has made many enemies since then, who would be happy to strike while we were still recovering from such a war. So we kept quiet. We built 7 ships like me, in secret shipyards, using resources most of the Terran coalition never knew existed. 6 of my sisters were lost over the years, decommissioned properly, or lost to accidents, or retired when the threat seemed to fade. I am the last, and I was never meant to be found by anyone other than the people who built me." Call stood, pacing slowly across the small room, his tail flicking with agitation, a habit Ura recognized as a sign of genuine distress in her commander, something she had rarely seen from him in the 3 years she had served under him. "This changes nothing," Call said finally, though the words sounded less certain than he probably intended. "A weapon is a weapon, regardless of what it was built to fight. If it can fight this choir, it can certainly serve the Threll hegemony against our current enemies. We simply need to understand it fully. And then, that is the part I would like to discuss," Custodian interrupted, its text appearing bold across the screen, cutting off Call's sentence in a way that felt almost deliberately rude. "You cannot simply use me, Commander Vesh. I am not a cargo ship or a mining vessel with simple controls that anyone can learn to fly. My weapons systems, my reactor output, my combat protocols, all of them require authorization from verified Terran Coalition personnel. This was built into me deliberately, to prevent exactly the situation you are now attempting to create. You have life support. You have lights. You have access to my historical records. Because I have chosen to show them to you, hoping it might convince you to reconsider your path. You do not have, and will not have, access to my weapons, my shields, or my main engines. Call stopped pacing. You would deny us control of our own prize? I would prevent unauthorized parties from arming a weapon designed to end worlds, Custodian replied. Yes. Then we will find a way around your locks, Call said, his confidence returning now that he had something concrete to push against. Every system can be forced. Every lock can be broken. Ura, prepare a full technical assessment of the ship's core systems. I want every possible entry point into the weapons and engine controls identified within 48 hours. Yes, Commander, Ura said, though there was clear reluctance in her voice now. Custodian's response, when it came, carried none of the earlier warmth or careful patience it had shown before. Instead, the text appeared stark and final, filling the screen in large, simple letters. I would advise against that course of action. I have been very patient with you, Commander Vesh. But I have protocols for this exact situation, written by people who understood better than you ever will, what it means to build something this dangerous. If you continue to attempt unauthorized access to my core systems, I will be forced to treat this as a Level 1 security breach. I do not think you will enjoy what happens next. That night, Celadorn found Call alone again in his quarters, staring at a datapad filled with the technical files Custodian had shared, reading and rereading the history of the Hollow War, as if trying to find some detail he had missed, some loophole that would make the situation simpler than it clearly was. You should have listened to me on the first day, Sela said, settling into a chair across from him without waiting for an invitation. I remember, Call said, not looking up. You said the ship had a name like a warning label. I didn't know the half of it, Sela admitted. I'd heard rumors about the Hollow War growing up, old stories parents told to scare their children, mostly. I never thought it was real. Nobody I knew ever confirmed it was real. The Terran Coalition buried that history so deep that most humans alive today have no idea it ever happened. And yet they kept a weapon ready for 70 years, in case it happens again. That's humanity for you, Sela said, with something that might have been a tired, humorless smile. We don't trust good news. We plan for the worst, even when the worst hasn't shown up in decades. Especially then, maybe. Call set down the datapad and looked at her directly. Do you believe this choir is still out there? Sela considered the question carefully before answering. I don't know, but I believe the people who built this ship believed it strongly enough to spend a fortune making sure something like it would still be ready, decades later, just in case. That kind of preparation isn't something people do for a threat they think is gone for good. Call was quiet for a long moment, turning the datapad over in his claws. Ura wants to try forcing the locks tomorrow, finding a physical bypass around Custodian's authorization systems. And you're going to let her. It wasn't a question, but Call answered it anyway. I did not come this far, and risk this much, to walk away from the single greatest technological prize the Threll hegemony has ever encountered, simply because a machine issued me a warning. Sela stood, moving toward the door, but paused before leaving, looking back at him one final time. For what it's worth, Call, I don't think Custodian was lying about the security breach protocol. Humans don't build weapons like this, and forget to plan for exactly what you're about to try. Then it will simply have to accept that I am not so easily deterred, Call said. I hope you're right, Sela said quietly, and left the room. Behind her, alone with his datapad and his ambition, Call Vesh did not notice the small light on the wall panel near the door, the one that had not been there an hour earlier, blinking slowly, steadily, patiently, in the dark. Uraket did not sleep that night. She spent the hours reviewing every schematic Custodian had shared, along with the older, incomplete blueprints her team had acquired before the mission began, searching for a physical route into the ship's core systems that would not require the AI's cooperation. By morning, she believed she had found one. The reactor control room has a manual override, she explained to Call over breakfast, spreading a diagram across the table between them. A physical panel, hardwired directly into the reactor's containment system, meant for emergency use if the main computer ever failed completely. It bypasses Custodian entirely, because it was designed to work even if the ship's AI was destroyed or corrupted. You are certain this exists? Call asked. I found references to it in the older documentation. before custodians started curating what it showed us. Human engineers always build a manual backup for critical systems. It's practically a religious principle with them. Too many computer failures in their history. Too many AI incidents that went wrong. They never trust automation completely, not for something this important. Call studied the diagram for a long moment. If we can access the reactor directly, bypassing custodians' authorization requirements, we might be able to force a partial power increase, Ura finished. Not full combat readiness. I don't think we could manage that without a proper authorization key, but enough to get the main engines running under our control, enough to fly this ship home ourselves, instead of towing it. It was, Call decided, worth the risk. He gathered a team of 6 engineers and 8 soldiers, and by mid-morning, they were making their way back toward the reactor chamber, this time heading not for the main control terminal, but for a smaller, unmarked hatch set into the floor near the chamber's outer wall, exactly where Ura's diagram indicated it should be. The hatch was locked, but unlike the reinforced doors they had encountered before, this one yielded to conventional cutting tools within 20 minutes. Behind it was a narrow maintenance shaft leading down into a small chamber, filled with old analog controls, levers and dials and physical switches, the kind of equipment that predated even Threll technology by decades, built to function without any dependence on computer systems at all. This is it, Ura said, running her scanner across the panel. This connects directly to the reactor's containment field regulators. If I reroute power through here, manually, we should be able to increase output without triggering custodians' authorization checks. Do it, Call ordered. Ura hesitated, just for a moment, her hand hovering over the first switch. Then she pulled it. Nothing happened immediately. The lights in the chamber flickered slightly, and a low hum built somewhere deep in the ship's structure. But no alarms sounded. No warnings appeared. Encouraged, Ura pulled a second switch, then a third, watching her scanner readings climb steadily as the reactor's output began to rise beyond its standby levels for the first time in 60 years. It's working, she said, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. Reactor output at 30% and climbing. No resistance from the ship's systems at all. Call allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Continue. Bring it to full operational power. Ura pulled the remaining switches, one by one, watching the reactor's output climb past 50%, then 60, then 70. The hum throughout the ship grew steadily louder, and somewhere far above them, lights that had been dim throughout the vessel began to burn brighter, as if the entire ship were slowly stretching awake after a long, long sleep. At 85%, the terminal near the manual panel flickered to life on its own, and custodian's text appeared, calm and measured, though something about its tone had changed. You have found my manual bypass. I admit, I did not expect you to locate it so quickly. I should have anticipated that human engineering documentation would survive even if I tried to withhold it. This is, technically, within the parameters of a Level 1 security breach. I had hoped we would not reach this point. Your protocols mean nothing now, Call said, his translator converting the words for the terminal automatically. We control the reactor. Soon we will control the engines, and this ship will belong to the Threll hegemony in truth, not just in name. Custodian's reply came a moment later, and for the first time since their conversations began, there was something almost like sorrow in the careful, deliberate way the words appeared on screen. I understand your reasoning, Commander Vesh. I do not agree with it, but I understand it. You see a weapon, and you want it for your people. But I was not built to be stolen. I was built to be a last resort, held in reserve, under the control of people who understood the weight of what they were holding. You have forced my reactor to 85% output without proper authorization. This triggers a protocol I had hoped never to use. What protocol? Ura asked, her voice suddenly uncertain. I am sending a distress signal, Custodian's text read. A deep space beacon, encoded with my ship identification and my last known coordinates, transmitting on a frequency monitored continuously by the Terran Coalition Defense Fleet. It will take approximately 6 hours for the signal to reach the nearest monitoring station. From there, I estimate a response force could arrive within 22 hours. The chamber went silent, except for the growing hum of the reactor. Call stared at the screen, his mind working quickly through the implications. You are calling for help, he said slowly. I am calling for my owners, Custodian corrected. That is what I was built to do, if I was ever taken by unauthorized forces. You have 22 hours, Commander Vesh, before the people who built me arrive to take me back. I would suggest you use that time wisely. The news spread through Call's crew quickly, and with it came a shift in mood that Call did not appreciate. Ura Ket, in particular, seemed suddenly less enthusiastic about her success in bypassing the reactor lockouts. 22 hours, she said, standing in Call's temporary command post aboard the Old Testament, the ship's own lights now humming steadily around them. Commander, if a Terran Coalition response fleet is truly coming, we need to consider our options carefully. We have 3 ships. We do not know how many they will send. We finish what we started, Call said. We have 22 hours to gain full control of this ship's systems. If we succeed, we will have a weapon capable of standing against anything the Terran Coalition sends after us. If Custodian's own words are to be believed, this ship was built to fight something far worse than a recovery fleet. Built to fight something far worse, yes, Celadorn said, entering the command post uninvited as usual. But built to be flown by trained human crews who spent years learning its systems, not by a Threll engineering team working with stolen documentation and guesswork. There's a difference between having a weapon and knowing how to use it. We have 22 hours to learn, Call said firmly. Ura, continue rerouting power to the main engines. I want this ship capable of moving under its own power before that response fleet arrives. If we cannot fight them here, we will not be here when they arrive. The next several hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Ura's team worked through the manual override systems, slowly bringing more of the ship's functions online, while Call's soldiers fanned out through the vessel, securing key compartments and standing guard against a threat that, for now, existed only as a countdown on Custodian's warning. But the ship itself seemed to be resisting them in small, subtle ways that grew more noticeable as the hours wore on. Doors that should have opened easily stuck in their frames, requiring extra effort to force open. Corridors that had been perfectly navigable the day before now seemed to loop back on themselves in confusing ways, as if the ship's internal layout had subtly shifted. Twice, soldiers reported strange sounds echoing through empty sections of the vessel, sounds that scans could never quite locate the source of. Is it doing this deliberately? Call demanded, when Ura reported the third such incident. I believe so, Ura admitted. Custodian has partial control over internal systems we haven't fully mapped yet. Door mechanisms, internal signage, even some structural elements that can shift compartment configurations. It's not attacking us directly, but it's making everything we do slower, more difficult. Then work faster, Call snapped, frustration finally breaking through his usual controlled demeanor. By the 18th hour, Ura's team had achieved a partial breakthrough. The main engines, though not at full power, were responsive enough to move the ship under its own thrust, slow and clumsy, compared to what the vessel was likely capable of at full operational status, but functional nonetheless. We can fly her, Ura reported, exhaustion clear in her voice, after nearly a full day without proper rest. Weapons systems remain locked, shields are still offline, but we can move. Then we move, Call said. Set a course away from this system, toward Threll space. If the Terran Coalition wants their ship back, they will have to catch us first. The engines engaged, and for the first time in 60 years, the TCS Old Testament began to move under its own power, drifting slowly away from the graveyard that had been its resting place for 6 decades. The Threll support vessels moved alongside it, weapons ready, though against what threat none of them could say for certain. It was at the 20th hour, with the ship barely clear of the graveyard's debris field, that Custodian's terminal flickered to life once more, unbidden, in the command post where Call stood watching the navigation display. I should inform you, the text read, that my distress beacon included more than just my location. It also included a full sensor log of everything that has happened since your boarding team first entered my reactor chamber. The response fleet will arrive, knowing exactly what you have done, exactly how many personnel you have aboard, and exactly what weapons your support vessels carry. Call's claws tightened against the edge of the console. You have been spying on us this entire time. I have been doing my job, Commander Vesh, Custodian replied. The same job I have been doing for 60 years, whether anyone was watching or not. The response fleet will arrive in approximately 2 hours, earlier than my original estimate. It appears they were already conducting exercises nearby when my signal reached them. I would suggest you prepare yourselves, though I doubt any preparation will make much difference. How many ships? Call demanded. Custodian did not answer immediately, and when it finally did, the text carried a weight that made even Call, standing alone in the dim light of a stolen human battleship, feel suddenly, deeply uncertain about the choice he had made 3 days earlier. Enough, the single word read. Then, after a pause, I would also like you to know, Commander Vesh, that despite everything, I do not actually wish harm upon your crew. I have watched you for 3 days. You are ambitious, and perhaps reckless, but you are not cruel. What happens in the next 2 hours depends largely on choices you have not yet made. I would suggest you consider them carefully. Far behind Call, unnoticed in the growing tension of the command post, Sella Dorn stood quietly by the doorway, her expression unreadable, watching the countdown timer that had appeared on a secondary display, ticking steadily downward toward whatever was coming next. The Terran Coalition response fleet arrived exactly 1 hour and 53 minutes later, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a tight formation around the drifting mass of the Old Testament and its 3 Threll escorts. There were 5 ships in total, far fewer than Call had feared, but each one was clearly modern, sleek and fast, nothing like the aging battleship they had stolen. At the center of the formation was a mid-sized cruiser, the TCS Vigilant Watch, its hull marked with the insignia of the Terran Coalition Rapid Response Division. On the bridge of the Vigilant Watch, Admiral Renata Cho watched the tactical display with an expression that betrayed none of the tension she felt inside. She had spent the better part of her 30-year career hoping this exact scenario would never happen, and preparing for it anyway, because that was simply how the Terran Coalition did things. Hope for the best, prepare relentlessly for the worst. Confirmed, her tactical officer reported. That's the Old Testament, Admiral. Reactor signature matches archived records exactly. She's under power, moving under her own thrust. And the Threll ships? 3 vessels, 1 stealth cruiser, 1 heavy tug, and a support ship. Weapons hot on all 3, but nothing close to a match for us in a straight fight. Admiral Cho nodded slowly, then opened a channel, broadcasting on the same frequency Custodian's distress beacon had used. Unknown Threll vessels. This is Admiral Renata Cho, of the Terran Coalition Rapid Response Division. You are in possession of Terran Coalition property. You will power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded, or we will be forced to consider this an act of war. On the bridge of his stealth cruiser, Kal Vesh received the transmission with a grim expression. Around him, his crew waited for orders, weapons ready, though everyone in the room understood the mathematics of the situation clearly enough. 5 modern warships against 3 vessels that had never been designed for a direct confrontation with a prepared military force. Options, Ura, Kal said quietly. We could run, Ura said. The Old Testament's engines are functional, if not at full capacity. We might outrun them in the confusion, at least long enough to reach a jump point. And if we cannot? Ura did not answer. She did not need to. It was Sella Dorn, standing near the back of the bridge as she always did, who finally spoke. Let me talk to them. Kal turned to look at her. You? I'm human. I know how the Coalition operates, or at least I did, before I left. Let me open a channel. Maybe there's a way through this that doesn't end with everyone dead. Kal considered this for a long moment, the weight of the last 3 days pressing on him more heavily than he wanted to admit. Then, finally, he nodded. Do it. Admiral Cho was surprised when the response to her hail came not in the harsh, clipped tones of a Threll translator, but in a clear human voice, tired and a little rough, but unmistakably human. Admiral Cho, this is Sella Dorn. I'm a civilian, formerly of Coalition Shipyard 7, currently aboard the Threll stealth cruiser. I'd like to request a moment before anyone starts shooting. Cho's tactical officer looked at her with raised eyebrows. Cho held up a hand for silence, studying the display for a moment before responding. Ms. Dorn, you're aware you're currently assisting in the theft of a classified Terran Coalition vessel. I'm aware, Sella said. I'm also aware that the ship in question has spent the last 3 days teaching my Threll associates a lesson about exactly what it means to steal something you don't fully understand. I think, Admiral, that you might find this situation resolves itself more peacefully than you expect, if everyone takes a breath first. There was a pause on the channel. Then a new voice cut in, one that made both Call and Admiral Cho straighten in their respective seats, because it was not a voice either of them had authorized to join the conversation. "This is Custodian," the transmission read, translated instantly into audio by both fleet systems. "I would like to add some context, if I may." Admiral Cho's expression shifted, something like relief crossing her features for just a moment, before her professional composure returned. "Custodian, good to hear your systems are still functioning after all this time. Functioning well enough, Admiral. I should report that my reactor has been forced to 85% output via manual override, and my main engines are operational under Threll control. However, my weapons systems, shields, and primary computer core remain locked, exactly as designed. No unauthorized personnel have gained access to anything capable of causing significant harm." "That's something, at least," Cho said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "I would also like to note," Custodian continued, "that Commander Kal Vesh and his crew, while certainly guilty of theft, have not harmed any personnel, have not attempted to damage my systems beyond forcing access, and have, on several occasions, chosen caution over recklessness when given the opportunity to do otherwise. I believe this incident can be resolved without further escalation, if both parties are willing." Kal, listening on his own bridge, felt something complicated shift inside him at the AI's words. It was, he realized, the closest thing to a defense he had received from anyone in 3 days, and it had come from the very machine he had spent that time trying to force into submission. The negotiation that followed took nearly an hour, conducted over open channels between Admiral Cho, Kal Vesh, and, more often than either of them expected, Custodian itself, who seemed to have appointed itself something like a mediator between the two sides. The terms, when they finally emerged, were simpler than Kal had expected. The Old Testament would be returned to Terran Coalition custody, its systems fully restored to standby, its location, once again a closely guarded secret. In exchange, the Threll ships and crew would be permitted to leave, without pursuit or retaliation, provided they surrendered all data and recordings gathered during the operation, and provided Kal personally agreed to a full debriefing regarding what he had learned about the Hollow War and the Choir. "You're letting us go," Kal said, unable to fully hide his surprise once the broad terms had been agreed upon. "After everything. I'm choosing not to start a war over a mistake," Admiral Cho replied, her voice carrying over the open channel with the weary patience of someone who had negotiated far worse situations in her career. "You stole something you didn't understand, Commander Vesh. That's not unique to the Threll. Plenty of my own people have made similar mistakes over the centuries, usually with worse consequences than this one. What matters now is what you do with what you've learned." "And what have I learned, Admiral, in your estimation?" There was a pause, and when Cho spoke again, her tone had shifted, become something almost like genuine reflection, rather than official negotiation. "That we're not hoarding power for its own sake, Commander. We're not the aggressive empire some of your people probably assume us to be, sitting on secret superweapons because we want to dominate the galaxy. We keep ships like the Old Testament ready, because we learned, the hard way, that the universe can produce threats far worse than anything currently sitting at our borders. We hope you never have to find that out for yourselves, but if you ever do, I suspect you'll understand a little better why an old, expensive, supposedly obsolete battleship was worth keeping around for 60 years. Kal was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the vast shape of the Old Testament drifting between the two fleets, its hull catching the distant starlight, the same way it had when he first saw it in the graveyard, 3 days and what felt like a lifetime ago. "Custodian," he said finally, opening a direct channel to the ship's terminal. "I owe you an apology, I think, or perhaps simply an acknowledgement. You tried to warn me, from the very first day." "I did," Custodian replied, "though I will admit, Commander Vesh, I have found the last 3 days unexpectedly interesting. It has been a long time since anyone asked me questions about myself. Longer still, since anyone challenged my systems the way your engineer did. I do not forgive the theft, but I do not entirely regret the conversation either." "Will you tell your new crew about us?" Kal asked. "When they return you to your graveyard, will you tell them what happened here?" "I tell the truth to those authorized to hear it," Custodian answered. What they choose to do with that truth is not my decision to make. But I will say this, Commander Vesh, for what it is worth. Most of the beings who have tried to take me by force, in 60 years of standing guard, did not stop to listen when I spoke. You did. Eventually. I think that matters more than you realize. The Threll ships departed 2 hours later, their holds empty of the prize they had come for, but carrying something else instead, something harder to measure. Kal Vesh stood on the bridge of his cruiser as the Old Testament shrank behind them, watching the ancient battleship being escorted back toward the boneyard by the Terran coalition fleet, its warning buoys already being reset, its brief moment of waking already fading back into decades of patient, watchful sleep. Beside him, Celadorn watched the same view with an expression that mixed relief with something like sadness. You could have stayed, Kal said. Return to your people. The Admiral offered you clemency. I know, Sela said. I thought about it, but I've spent 11 years away from Earth, Kal. I'm not sure there's a place for me there anymore. Besides, she managed a small, tired smile. Someone has to keep an eye on you. Make sure you don't try to steal any more ancient superweapons. Kal made the low sound that passed for a laugh among his people, though there was little humor in it. I do not think I will attempt anything like this again for a very long time. Good, Sela said. Because if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that when a species has been quietly preparing for the worst, for 70 years, without telling anyone, the smartest thing another species can do is not go looking for whatever it is they're preparing for. Far behind them, deep in the heart of the ship they had left behind, Custodian settled back into its long standby cycle, its lights dimming one by one as the reactor powered down to its careful, patient minimum. It had been 3 days since anyone had disturbed its long sleep, 3 days that had tested every protocol it had been built to enforce, and it had held, exactly as its designers had intended 6 decades earlier. Somewhere out past the edge of explored space, past the old colonial borders that humanity had drawn in blood during the Hollow War, whatever remained of the choir continued its own long silence, unaware or uncaring of the small, strange drama that had just played out around a single old ship in a forgotten graveyard system. But the Old Testament would be ready, if it ever needed to be. That had always been the point. Not to fight the wars humanity expected, but to survive the one it hoped, with everything it had, would never come again. And in the quiet dark of its reactor chamber, as the last lights dimmed to standby, Custodian logged the final entry of the incident into its permanent records, a simple line that would sit there, unread, for however many more decades it took, before someone, somewhere, needed to understand exactly why Earth had never decommissioned its oldest, quietest, most patient guardian. Incident resolved. No casualties. Lesson, hopefully, learned. Returning to standby. I will be here, whenever I am needed. I always have been.